Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hello there. It is time for another episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Welcome or welcome back to our show. And thank you for coming along on the journey of this podcast that is designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every week with Craig Brown, an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, how are you today?
I'm great, Thom. Looking forward to this guest. This is a little bit different than the people we've been talking to. We're talking to another big company, but not a car company.
Well, this is going to be an awesome episode. And one of the things that's fun is we're sitting here in person because we are live at ConX 19. So, Craig, it's good to see you in person.
Thank you, Thom. Good to see you too. And hi, Erika. It's good to see you.
Hey, good to meet you guys.
So our guest today is Erika Klein, and every single week we try to bring you really interesting interviews on this podcast where we can share ideas that are going to help the listeners enhance and grow their careers. And today is certainly one of those episodes. So as I said, we are here with Erika Klein. She is the Director of Hardware Engineering at Microsoft. So Erika, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So Erika, why don't you give us a little bit of your background? What's your backstory? How did you get to where you are today as the Director of Hardware Engineering?
All right. Well, I've been at Microsoft for almost 11 years now. I started off in the Windows client team doing feature management work and managing teams around feature management for the Windows product. And then I had some colleagues who went over to the Azure Cloud and said, hey, this is a happening place. Come on over here. And so I took the leap and went into a more hardware-centric world and started off around a lot of the hardware sustaining engineering for cloud data centers, and then moved into managing a PLM team. So definitely not your typical straightforward trajectory.
Hi, Erika. Yeah, you know, when people say PLM, a lot of people think mechanical engineering and something like a car. PLM and Microsoft is not two terms I would have put together. Can you describe just, and your title is hardware manager, and I thought Microsoft did software. So just elaborate a bit on how broad of the scope is this? Is it all products, all services? Azure, to the folks on the podcast that don't know, that's your cloud solutions and services. So just give us a better scope of how far does this go? How far are you the PLM orchestrator?
Right. So at Microsoft, we're mainly a software company. We do have a few big hardware products around Surface and Xbox. I'm not managing those, but I'm involved in the Azure ones. And from an Azure perspective, our product is servers and racks and network gear going into cloud data centers to support all the ever-expanding Azure services that customers need.
Yeah, and one of those customers is my former employer, and so I'm very comfortable talking about Azure and what parts of it we use at General Motors. But that's not the goal today. The goal is to understand, here we both are at this conference on CM2, what's now named the Institute of Process Excellence, and we're both speaking at different times during the week. It's interesting to me that from our different points of view, we put the same importance on configuration management. Was that obvious? To me, it's obvious at a software company. Was it obvious for the hardware platforms and servers that they needed that? Maybe describe a bit how that journey went.
It is obvious, but I would argue that we spend a lot of time telling people they got to do things that they don't want to do, right? People want to get things out the door quick. They don't want the overhead at times, and it's holding that quality line that's so important.
Yeah, so this is exactly the conflict I always get into is the people that think we're putting in too much bureaucracy. They say, "Oh, you're messing with my ability to innovate," Right. You're slowing me down. I won't be able to compete with the guys across town in our case. Is that really the case? And what I'm getting at is, does configuration management encourage innovation or slow it down? Or how do you manage that well so that you get innovation at the same time that you get quality?
That's a good question. I think, we're always struggling with time to market versus quality. I'd like to see the two blend together more. I don't think we're at a level of maturity, but I think there is a point where you can get there. Mm-hmm. And I think that you can't have true innovation if you don't have your product completely locked down, if you don't know exactly what the elements are that make up your product. How do you protect your IP?
Yeah, and you hit a nail on the head. The true innovation is a measure of meaningful change, meaningful innovation. So we had a guest a bit ago where we talked about rework versus intended change. And we just talked about a ratio of that, right? If you had more rework than you do intended change, chances are you're chaotic. You need CM2, right?
Definitely.
Do you have that? Has it improved, this ratio at Microsoft?
We're getting better. I would say that we still have a long way to go as far as, overall quality, really driving. We have a good document control change management process, but I would argue that our upstream business change management processes aren't as solid as they need to be that flow into that.
And is it just a case of consistency, or is it they just don't even document it? They're not even ready for that yet. It's
more that it's very decentralized, and oftentimes people don't understand their dependencies when they're making their business decisions.
Interesting.
And so then when it flows down to document control and you're actually making the changes in the PLM system, people start screaming, wait a minute. This is going to impact this, and this, who thought about this? And then it's back to square one almost.
And are you able now to have those discussions and move it gets down to a question of what decisions do you make when? And can you move those more critical decisions to a better place in the process?
We're working on that.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of, I think with Azure initially, there was an explosion of initial growth, and everybody was just scrambling to try to keep up.
That was the cloud thing. Everybody's in, right?
Exactly. So we were just trying to keep up, keep the lights going here. And now we're kind of at the point now where it's like, okay, we're comfortable in our PLM instance. How do we take things to the next level of maturity? And we're forming things like end-to-end process lifecycle management to look across the entire pipeline, not just at our product data management, but looking beyond that.
So another common interest we had is if I go back 6-8 years ago, for our different parts of our companies, we were using Team Center for managing for sure the mechanical BOM or the hardware BOM. Mm-hmm. And you already summarized the kind of products you have that have mechanical components. We both discussed about 3 years ago here in Southern California the need for a change, and in fact, you guys were ahead of us a bit in embracing Eris Innovator. And could you summarize for us now where you're at? Is it still Eris Innovator, or are there other things that you'd like to make us aware of?
So it is Eris Innovator. That is our system that we're using for our server and rack configuration management. So we've got all of our BOMs in there, our EE BOMs, our mechanical BOMs, as well as our server documentation.
Interesting. And I think the configuration side, a lot of people get, like, if we were doing our car example, it'd be the same way, right? What configuration of the car did we provide you as a customer? You need that same kind of rigor in any kind of systems that we all develop. So that's good.
One thing that we're working on too is trying to ensure that we have that we keep the system as pure as we can. I know there's lots of debate around.
Expand. What do you mean by pure?
How much stuff do you layer in on top? How much stuff do you actually put in your PLM system? So,
interesting.
So we've been talking about the right tools for the right functions. Mm-hmm. And so we've got things going like a Dynamics 365 to help from a sourcing perspective that's integrated in to our PLM system.
Interesting.
Our Eris Innovator system, so that we can have layering on top of our BOMs as far as attribution goes that help with like long lead time material prep, right?
Yeah, and this is exactly
more transactional.
Yeah, this is exactly the reason to use Eris Innovator. It's easier to do that there than we've seen in our experience. It's one of the hallmarks of why they developed it and why people are adopting it, I think. So when you were introducing yourself, you hit on a phrase that the software side of a product, a car, we've been doing the same thing about feature management and even a bill of features rather than a bill of materials. So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Describe to our audience how a bill of features, why it's important, and is it like a bill of materials? Is it better? Is it worse?
Right. So there's actually two aspects there. One is the actual like requirements, right, that feed into your design, and how do you get those under change control, and how do you have those flow in? So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that we're managing software for the hardware in our PLM system as well. So we have what's called software BOMs that are basically parallel to hardware BOMs in our system. We have not merged them. We merged them from a reporting view, but not from a system view, because we want to be able to rev software more frequently, because it's just a natural thing that happens over time versus hardware.
So they could be an Eris, or Eris Innovator, but instead you have them somewhere else. Is that a Microsoft toolkit, or is that?
No, we actually have the software in Eris too. It's not the actual physical software bits, but the software versioning. So our software BOMs are in Eris.
You were making the point about the frequency's different, the release frequency.
Right.
Was that alone enough reason to be in a different kind of system, or is it a different installation?
Not a different system, a different BOM.
That's
what I meant.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
This is an important concept, everybody. You have systems and systems of systems, and as you organize your BOMs, it's okay to reference other BOMs.
Right.
They don't have to be in one monolithic BOM. And maybe that's something, when people have 100 parts, they like, well, why wouldn't we have one BOM? Well, that's true. 100 parts, you could probably do that. When you have 10,000 parts, and I'm leaving out the software pieces in a car, well, now all of a sudden you need nesting or hierarchy, right?
Right.
I can't even imagine how many features we both manage. It's got to be tens of thousands, right? And so therefore, the whole notion of BOMs, referencing BOMs, is really quite important.
Absolutely.
So would you give, if folks are listening to us and they're like, okay, you and I are clearly aware of what we're talking about. If somebody's a little confused about a feature BOM, what's an analogy that might help them understand what we're talking about?
So I guess I could give an example. Maybe that would help. So if we're designing a server for our cloud data centers, we will put into the server BOM, all the electrical, mechanical, everything that goes all the way up to everything that's in the server, right? And then we'll throw in on top of that the chassis and the rack level, so that we cover the entire design, the switches in there, all that stuff. So we have that hierarchical view, but with every piece of hardware, there's corresponding software. Yep. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we have all the firmware called out, the BIOS. Right. Within the server, you've got FPGA cards. It's got its own firmware. You've got a motherboard with a BIOS and BMC and all that. So all of those things are being called out in a separate BOM that correlates directly to that hardware BOM, so that we can reference both, but be able to change them on a different frequency because of the need.
And one other thing, so let's go one step further. You mentioned requirements management before, and of course, where you put these servers and the reliability of the power grid and the way you cool it. I mean, there's all kinds of other performance characteristics that aren't necessarily a part or a feature, but which features you select are dependent upon, robust power and so on. So depending on where you're putting these servers and whether you have your own power supplies or you're getting it from some power company, this can influence what features you choose, right?
Absolutely. our servers, we design servers for different types of data centers.
Interesting.
So we have, different height, weight, networking, power constraints that we have to think about, as well as, how are the different teams within the Azure cloud going to be running their workloads? Because that'll indicate how much power they're going to consume and how many servers we can stack in a rack and how we can configure those in those cloud data centers.
See, I think it's going to be big OEMs like us that talk more about feature management and requirements management, which should be integral in our PLM systems. Whether the PLM providers can do it or whether they provide us a toolkit that lets us interface it to other things, well, I think there's a big debate there, and you'll get different opinions from different people. But if you look at what we're accomplishing, it is a heterogeneous environment. There's multiple different kinds. Frequency, I'm really glad you brought it up. Release frequency of change is actually one of the key things in our minds. And I think a lot of people don't think it through. When they realize that, then all of a sudden there's a degree of freedom you have to have. You still have to have configuration management, but you have to have this degree of freedom to manage them on this different frequency rate.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. The implementing and executing and dispositioning, cutting in a software change is very different than a hardware change, right? Because of the physical nature, right? So being able to have slightly different ways we can manage those and having that separation of the software BOM makes a big difference.
I noticed in the abstracts of what you're going to talk about, this portion about data governance. And I don't think we talk enough about that either. Could you just summarize for us what data governance means to Microsoft and PLM?
Right. So one of the things that we quickly realize as we're implementing a PLM solution is that we have upstream and downstream dependencies. And every time we make a change, we want to re-architect how we do something to meet some new business need. We're suddenly impacting, upstream from the way that they need to qualify something, for example, to downstream systems that need to consume our BOM data so that they can do their pieces, whether it's billing, whether it's, just the tools that need to go and validate the hardware that the manufacturers are building, right? And so when we run into these situations like this, we have to be able to sync with these teams and make sure that we're all on the same page. I'll be giving an example tomorrow around how we ran into a problem with commas in our PLM system.
Interesting.
And how it broke the pipeline.
Interesting. It's really amazing. To all of our listeners, when you hear a computer scientist or a systems engineer talk about data governance, it's really important. Please pay attention. And one of these days when you have this breakage due to something just like you mentioned, Erika, I think you might remind yourselves, well, they talked about data governance. Maybe that's what they meant.
Yep, we broke the Azure cloud with commas, and that formed a data governance council across our tool teams to start syncing. And that was good motivation for all these people to join that council too.
Well, see, there's an opportunity. That's a lesson in transformation, is sometimes you just have to wait for the right opportunity to show up, which sometimes is a failure. Exactly. But anyways, well, this has been fascinating. We're sponsored. We're a part of this thing called the Digital Enterprise Society. From my involvement in the team, Microsoft hasn't been an active member, and yet you have to be solving some of these same problems and issues and even vision for how this thing all needs to evolve. Do you have recommendations for our society? I mean, we used to be just team-centered tools. Obviously, you and I have been talking about something else with Eris Innovator. What else do you think the Digital Enterprise Society should talk about?
I think that it's important to look at the whole ecosystem, this whole concept that the IPX folks have been talking about around the digital thread is really resonating with me. I want to be able to look beyond just our PLM system and look at everything else going on in the pipeline and how we can really connect those things. I want to be able to connect to, for example, the hardware inventory system. So that says, here's what's actually in the data centers. But here in the PLM system is what it should be,
Right.
what it should be configured as. I want to also be able to not just run simulations for thermal testing to see what the power and airflow
Right.
is for a particular server. I want to know what's actually happening in the data centers and have that feedback so that we can adjust our designs accordingly.
Yeah.
Based on real data, not based on, oh, this is how we think it's going to work.
Or even adjust operation for a little bit while you recover with a recovery plan of some sort.
Exactly.
So those are, you hear a lot of buzzwords around Internet of Things and so on. If we could go back up for a second, continually monitoring in operations and being able to adjust, not just future designs, but current operation based upon that insight. It's a really good thing. You need configurations. You also probably need some analytics and some intelligence, and eventually some artificial intelligence, right?
Right.
So these things are all coming. I think the Digital Enterprise Society, as we get more and more interested folks like yourself, I'm sure we'll begin discussing these as well. And we're agnostic to suppliers. We want to be able to talk about solutions wherever they come from, even internal solutions. I could imagine, it's a topic for another day, but Microsoft, General Motors, we probably all have our own internal solutions too. And over time, we'll either keep doing them because they're a competitive advantage, or we'll figure out that they're not a competitive advantage. And so we'll work together to come up with a commercial solution. So it's really interesting. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to hand it back to Thom.
All right. Thank you.
So Erika, when Craig and I do these interviews, Craig is obviously the technology expert and I am not. However, one thing that I do in my day job and in my career is I consult with companies about how do people get more out of their careers? How do people work across that gap from potential to performance? And so I don't like to let most of our guests get away without turning this around with a little bit of advice for our listeners, because a lot of the people who are listening to our podcast are still at the early and medium stages of their career, and they're looking to grow their career. And when we started talking with you, you said it, that you didn't have a typical career path. And I love that because most of us won't have a typical career path. So what advice do you have for people who are looking at, where do I go from here?
Right. I think one of the things that's interesting about the PLM space is there's so much opportunity to expand within the space itself. You do not have to be just doing configuration management, for example. You can broaden the reach and look at some of these other pieces in the pipeline. I've found that oftentimes our ability to improve the processes and the way we work within our PLM system are hindered by our upstream and downstream dependencies. And I'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow as well. But those are great opportunities to start looking at, hey, how can we go and fix some of these other pieces so that it's all flowing more seamlessly?
Well, in a world where things are, kind of exploding, and you talked about the cloud and Azure just kind of blowing up, and everybody, my assumption is that was probably a little bit of drinking from a fire hose for everybody who worked in and around Microsoft during that time.
Oh, there's a gap. Somebody put their foot there. Oh, wait, there's another hole over here.
So when people are working in situations where things are just exploding in a good way, how can people stand out? Because I think that obviously you have some experience that in your career.
I think the one really good thing about the Azure space that I'm part of is that there's lots of opportunity to take charge, to basically go to your leadership and say, hey, there's something that I see over here. I want to go tackle this. Put together a plan, come up with a couple of options there and start driving it. And using data and bringing data to the table makes a huge difference there as well.
Well, Erika, thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thanks for sharing all of your information, thoughts, and ideas.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Hey, and thank you to everybody who listened. Craig, I kind of like this, doing these interviews here in person. It kind of makes it more fun than doing it over the computer, don't you think?
Yes, body language helps. I can explain things with my eyes that I can't do with my words. It's great.
So we'll be doing several of these while we're here live at Connex. And so I don't know which order these will go in, but you definitely want to go backwards and go forwards and listen to more of these live interviews that we did at Connex 19. Hey, join us next week for more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week.